Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. Today, I'm continuing my Bob Dylan review series by discussing the album Infidels, which I'm using as an excuse to wear sunglasses inside. My wife is always like, no, you can't wear sunglasses inside. You look like a douchebag. I'm like, I don't know. I think I look like a stereotypical cool guy. But whatever, Bob Dylan is wearing sunglasses on the cover of Infidels. This is the first album after his so-called Christian period. But the first time I listened to this album, I wasn't really sure if he had left his Christian period. Like, the title of this album is Infidels. Now, as I listened to it more, I came to accept that, yeah, this probably can be called a post-Christian album. But one of the things I looked at while listening to the album was an interview he did in the Rolling Stone. And it was really weird because sometimes it came across like he was still judging society from a very conservative Christian perspective. But, other times he just sounded like the same old Bob Dylan who had a great respect for the history of rock music and was just happy to be writing songs. He also still continued to have a respect for idealistic figures from the 1960s. So I feel like overall the context with this album is Bob Dylan has just continued to evolve and to grow. This part of him that was Christian now informs part of his conscience, but he's not like fully immersed in that. He's not like a true believer, but there's like a fraction of a true believer that continues to be inside of him. The first track on this album, and probably the most famous, is called Joker Man. And I wonder if this is an autobiographical song about Dylan, since I think it's the consensus that in Don McLean's famous song, American Pie, the reference to the Joker is a coded reference to Bob Dylan. The song Joker Man is full of, but hey, no, you do not get to knock down Ludwig von B. Also, I'm going to take these off. I cannot read inside. Okay, sunglasses inside, not a good idea. So anyway, the imagery of Joker Man is quite religious. There's references to standing on water, to giving out bread, to Sodom and Gomorrah, to hell. That said, just as the earlier song My Back Pages marked Dylan moving on from political imagery, I view Joker Man as the song where he's announcing that he is moving on from religious imagery. He's saying he's happy to continue using it in a metaphorical way to talk broadly about ills that may face mankind, but he is sort of taking it off its vaunted platform and just making it another poetic tool. There's actually an official music video for Joker Man, and it's basically just a slideshow of images. Amongst the many photos of Bob Dylan, there are also images of Jesus and Hitler. So it's as if Bob's saying, as the musician, you aspire to be this charismatic, prophetic figure, but, there are all kinds of charismatic, prophetic figures in the world, so you better be careful who you're being. Meanwhile, I'll just be the Joker Man, and you don't have to take me too seriously. Track number 2 is called Sweetheart Like You. This is basically saying, love flourishes when you're off the clock, when you're away from the oppression of the boss. And Bob Dylan uses this song to express broad distrust for various institutional powers. It culminates with the line that say that patriotism is the last refuge to which a scoundrel clings. Steal a little and they throw you in jail, steal a lot and they make you a king. And it's easy listening as music, though Dylan's voice on this one kind of verges on talk singing, which holds it back from being a great melody. Now, I said Joker Man was probably the most famous song on this one. Track 3, Neighborhood Bully, probably the most controversial. Now, this one is widely interpreted to be about Israel. And when you hear the song knowing that, it's hard to hear it otherwise. It's saying this neighborhood bully has a tiny bit of land. This neighborhood bully tries to defend himself, but people say he's actually committing war crimes. It's a pretty clear-cut metaphor. That said, in that Rolling Stone interview I talked about, Dylan was very emphatic that he is not a political songwriter. He does not want this to be interpreted as a pro-Israel song. In fact, when he was asked that, he kind of said, what does pro-Israel mean? Israel has too many political party for there even to be a thing that's pro-Israel. So it was kind of a relief for me to read that interview and realize that whatever was going through Bob Dylan's mind when he wrote the song, that he's not a staunch Zionist, neoconservative type. My theory for what was going on in this song is, Bob Dylan being a secular Jewish person and also someone who was caught up in the evangelical Christian world, My understanding is lots of the most reactionary right-wing Zionists are not in fact members of the Jewish community, but these far-right Christians who want Israel to be established because it will allow for Jesus to return. But anyway, I feel like Bob Dylan was exposed to these arguments defending Israel, and he found them compelling as rhetoric, and he translated into that song about the misunderstood neighborhood bully. Does that mean Bob Dylan's willing to go out on a limb and politically be a Zionist? It appears not. He was just sort of persuaded by the rhetoric. And that's always been the thing with Bob Dylan. He's always been interested in politics as a form of art, but not comfortable actually committing to political statements and causes. So anyway, that's my interpretation, which allows me to enjoy the song a little more and not be unequivocally guilty about it. Track number 4 is called License to Kill. The tune of this one is reminiscent of Bob Dylan's earlier protest song, Chimes of Freedom. And at first it sounds like a song that's telling America not to be the cops of the world. So again, if you were worried that Bob Dylan was some kind of neoconservative and neighborhood bully, this song says, no, Bob Dylan, if he has any politics, they're still a bit more on the progressive side. That said, when he frames this song, he doesn't frame it as being a critique of an empire, any government, or of the capitalist system. He frames it as a critique of man's selfish ways, of man making all these horrible decisions. And to me, this shows that Bob Dylan still does have one foot in the Christian door, because rather than using a secular political framework, he's more like saying, man is overwhelmed with sin. Too many of us are stuck in our original sin, and thus we do all these horrible things to the world. Whereas, a secular leftist would focus on criticizing certain countries or the capitalist system. Track number 5 is called Man of Peace. And at this point, I'm really starting to notice how the songs and the tone of this album is kind of weird. Let me break this down. So the songs on this album are political, which is obviously not too weird for Bob Dylan, though we've seen it much less since the early 1960s. The songs are also a bit mysterious and vague, which is very consistent with Bob Dylan's writing style as well. His political songs are often broad calls for justice, not specific policy statements. And finally, these songs are cynical. Again, this is not an unusual quality for Bob Dylan. He's written many searing, cynical songs over the years. But combining all three of these Dylan-esque qualities into the same songs does make for something we really haven't seen before, things that are at once political, vague, and cynical. So in Man of Peace, Dylan sings a song that a lot of people with a lot of politics can relate to. He's criticizing self-proclaimed men of peace who don't in fact know what they're talking about and might in fact be con men. And that makes this song a bit unsettling because, you could hear it as a song you agree with. You could hear it about politicians promising to end wars and then taking back those promises once in office. But you could also very much hear this as another Christian song saying, don't trust any of those secular idealists. All of mankind is doomed. And until we accept a savior like Jesus, no man of peace is ever going to have a serious message. Now, I was just saying that Bob Dylan's political songs up to this point are incredibly vague. But then we get one of the more specific political songs we've gotten from him in a long time called Union Sundown. And this is a song that just straightforwardly denouncing the outsourcing of American labor, how this takes advantage of the third world and also screws over American workers. Track number 8 is called I and I. I wonder if this is the unofficial title of the song, the one that inspires the image of Infidels. And the song opens with a reference of Bob Dylan and a strange woman in a bed together. Presumably not an image you would be into if you were a devout conservative Christian. Like Joker Man, this song uses Christian references, but they're more in there as images than some source of inherent moral truth. And the song itself sounds kind of good, but there's also a kind of glumness to it. It's a cool glum, but it's just not as easy to love as some of those early Dylan classics. I think a final thing worth mentioning with I and I is apparently this title comes from Rastafarianism, and I didn't look too deeply in this, but I think it's like a reference to the oneness of the person and soul, or of the person and God. So clearly he's not tied up in a tight Christian tradition because he's looking to this other tradition. And the final song on the album is called Don't Fall Apart on Me Tonight. This one sounds quite a bit like Bob Marley's No Woman, No Cry. But while I was listening to it, I was thinking about another album closer, the end to John Wesley Harding, I'll Be Your Baby Tonight. And that song at this point is 17 years in Dylan's past. This song shows how much Dylan has changed since he was the confident young man recording I'll Be Your Baby Tonight. I mean, that song was just country swagger, whereas this one is a love song that's just pleading. None of that arrogance we had in the earlier Bob Dylan. Amongst the things he sings in the song, he sings, it's not even safe no more in the palace of the Pope, so we can no longer trust religion. It's as if Bob Dylan is in this post-religious place where he has no identity, and he just really needs his relationships to work out. He also talks about his cynicism around all politics. I wish I'd been a doctor. Maybe I'd have saved some life that had been lost. As if he'd saying, my protest songs don't do anything. If I wanted to do some good for the world, I should have been a doctor instead. And there's a line that goes, I ain't too good at conversation, girl, so you might not know exactly how I feel. But if I could, I'd bring you to the mountaintop, girl, and build you a house made out of stainless steel. So again, is Bob Dylan questioning the utility of being a singer-songwriter at all and saying that, he wished he had served the world in some more ordinary working class way. So overall, Infidels is a hard album to truly fall in love with. I think Joker Man is the closest thing that sounds like it could be a Dylan classic. But overall, there's a tinge of melancholy. And when Dylan begins to get political, it doesn't quite inspire a rallying cry. And also the politics are kind of confused. The influences are coming from different places. Needless to say, lots of Bob Dylan's left-wing fans aren't going to be a big fan of Neighborhood Bully. Nonetheless, there's a lot of good stuff on here, and it's an interesting historical contribution to the Dylan canon. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.